can go live on Instagram. I mean, it should be happening any second now.
Okay. Well, and yeah, and then you put it on Twitter or whatever. X.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I see it. Welcome.
Nice to see
So
you.
so China is
AI.
releasing a bunch of reasoning AIs this week.
Quen.
Quen, Mimi. So I've
Alibaba.
been used.
Alibaba's Quen. Oh yeah, Mimi as well.
Yeah, there was Mimi from Huawei, I want to say, or from Xiaomi or something. It's hard to for me to keep track of all the Chinese brands.
Yeah, it's they have really good models. The metrics look really good. I think actually the interesting thing is Sarah Hooker, who was at Google and now is at Cohere, has a paper that is about how the chatbot arena, which is generally considered
Oh,
the
this
gold
is the
standard.
ArcSwift paper you sent me.
Yeah, so apparently the people are gaming it, and the way you game it is the same way any kind of p hacking happens, which
Yeah.
means that they are throwing in like 100 different models, like Meta Llama 4 sends like 100 different models to the chatbot arena, and then pick the one that's doing the best. And open source models don't have the money to do that. They don't do that, whereas Meta and Google do. So they're
Yeah, so
able to game the
it's basically
metrics.
like, oh, you should give open source like a 15 to 20% bump. It'd be great if she could quantify like what um that delta is.
And maybe she quantifies it. But the other thing you do from sending all this data over to Chatbot Arena is you also get a lot of the data about what the questions are. Like what do people ask? What kinds of things do they ask? What kind of things do they not ask? And so you can hyper optimize the answers that you have to what they're looking for, what they ask, what kind of responses they respond to well. So you're able to hyper optimize. So like Google has like no, Meta had like 20% of all the chatbot arena questions seen,
Yeah.
whereas that's more than all open source bots had ever gotten to
Yeah, I think it
to.
was like 23% was all open source bots ever, and then Meta personally took 20%. So that was like, so we uh so what is it? So there's sort of like three when we talk about things, when we describe things as being true or false. One of the things we talk about is so there's three sort of categories. One is independently objectively verifiable, one is truthfulness, and then the third one is representativeness. And so this actually falls in the representativeness category. And so the canonical example of this is in medicine, where there's a bunch of research from prescription drug companies that shows that their prescription drugs are good for treating a particular illness, but there's no research that shows that natural herbs or inexpensive stuff treats the same illness because there's no economic incentive behind it. And so so people will conclude based on the weight of the evidence that the drugs are what works better, even though there's never really been any studies done on a weighted basis to prove that there's other things that are inexpensive. This is why like money distorts the field in scientific endeavors. And so you could imagine here in AI, like having money to basically run a bunch of experiments and then do p hacking or whatever, or do yeah population hacking functionally, it's the same pattern, and it's the same thing that we see in polling. So for example, the way that polling gets manipulated is you'll run like a poll with 50 to 500 people, depending on what you're trying to question, and you run it 20 times, and you just pick the one that you like, and that's the one that Rasmussen or CNN or whomever publishes. And the same thing is what
You think they're doing that? The poll companies
100%,
are running multiple
100%.
polls. Why would
Yep,
they want to manipulate it though?
because they have a political outcome that's in their agenda.
The
So
pollers are biased politically.
100%, 100%, no question, no question at all, at all.
It'd be easier to bias the population. It'd be easier to go to like, oh, I'm going to a redneck state or like a blue state and
The thing is they want to be able to look, they want to be able to show the one population that they questioned, right? The one sample that they questioned as being legitimate. And so they 100% do this. And actually, the pharma companies do this as well for the drug trials. And
yes.
it's a huge issue because, in my opinion, from having looked at
Oh,
this,
that's why the drug trials are so expensive because they're
yes,
fake. They're doing it so many times
yes,
to
correct.
make
And that's
the
why
result.
over time it's getting more expensive because the
They're
FDA
gaming
or
it more.
whomever is getting wise to the tricks. And the thing that made me realize this, and you can call me a nut job or whatever, I
So
don't
funny.
care, is that when the COVID vaccine came out, the technology was mRNA, and mRNA is very black and white, right? Like it's literally ATCG, and then there's a sequence. And so the mRNA sequence from the Chinese drug manufacturers and the US drug manufacturers was exactly the same, but the efficacy of their vaccines, the US ones were 90 to 95% efficacious, and the Chinese ones were only 50%. And
Mm.
so the Occam's razor explanation is that the US companies had been selected for in the FDA process to pass drug trials, whereas the Chinese companies had not. And so the Chinese companies were actually presenting quote unquote real data, and the US ones were doing this sort of like p hacking thing. And now, of course, it's come out that that was exactly what they did. But at the time, I
Wait,
was like,
because
this,
wait, because the Chinese had lower rate of success, or
yeah, the Chinese rate of success was a coin flip, which basically means statistically it didn't do anything, right? 50% efficacy, like
for the same drug.
the exact same mRNA sequence. It's not even the same drug, it's the
You're
same.
saying you're saying that China was actually doing science properly without
Yes.
hacking? Wow,
Yes,
that's
because they weren't selected for by the FDA process, because normally Chinese companies don't submit to the US process.
mm,
And the thing that confused the hell out of me was like we're in a geopolitical race and this is a quote unquote dangerous virus. So like every country would basically throw out all of its like normal IP protection stuff and just do whatever worked.
you
And
think
so
this
if
is
the
for the mRNA vaccine?
100%, you can go
The
look, you can
Chinese
go.
wasn't better?
No, the Chinese one was their data was the same because they just copied all the IP from the US companies and did the exact same thing because it was just it's an RNA sequence. It's an exact thing. There's no there's no confusion about it. And so like why is it that the exact same substance at scale under enormous pressure would have wildly different results? The only conclusion
In Europe, the trials as well with BioNTech also were positive.
I understand, but what I'm saying is that the what you want to look is for a company who's submitting the same thing in a new area. So the Chinese were not selected for in the US system or the European system. The European companies that passed the European trials were already selected for previously, and the US companies that passed the US trials were already previously selected. Anyway, the point here is that the data is manipulated. And so there's been a huge push in medicine for 25 years for the raw data to be required to come
Mm,
out when
That
FDA
should
makes
definitely happen. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff that is getting required, like publishing the data, should definitely happen.
right. And I think this is why people have such a low belief in the system because you're like, okay, show us all the raw data and show us all the trials that you didn't accept. Because the other thing they do is they sort of trim the data based on a variety of factors. So they're like basically like sculpting the outcome. And anyway, back to the AI leaderboard thing. I think the economics behind the leaderboard are super powerful. And so one of the questions I have is Grok doing this? So Meta, it's like we could see it, but like and you would assume Microsoft and OpenAI are doing it, but is Grok and Anthropic and all the other country companies doing it too? Your assumption is yes, right?
Anthropic, yes. I mean, anyone who has a lot of money, Grok, yeah, I guess all of them, yeah. Who have the money and can spend on it.
Yeah, so then on the limit, then basically what you have is two groups, the open source that can't do it, and then the closed source that can. And so you should only compare closed source models to each other because in the limit, you should expect that they can all more or less, let's say, mischaracterize rather than cheat. They can all
Yes.
mischaracterize similarly. And open source will just be its own thing. And so you
Yeah,
have to sort of mentally add a handicap.
I saw someone say that they thought that in their testing that our DeepSeek was always the best, which I haven't used much of, but I think that's an interesting.
I've used DeepSeek locally.
I don't
I think it's great.
know, quantized DeepSeek.
Yeah, yeah, it's 16-bit, so that was the actual rate. So all the other models are 32, but for whatever reason, DeepSeek released at 16. And so usually like you quantize down, right? And
Hmm.
because to get it to run locally, it needs to be small enough to fit in your RAM. And
So did you
so,
use the 671B quantized and not the 70B?
yeah, 671 quantized at like 16-bit, I think is what it is. I don't know. I'd have to look. I haven't actually checked in months because
Because
basically
I'm
from a
looking.
workflow perspective, I've been using Grok, and then I've done a lot of research on agents. So that's what I want us to talk today is that we've had a breakthrough in agents.
Yeah, let's talk about agents. Yeah, because I want to find a good one to use locally, and Gamma 3 is pretty good, but it's quite censored, so maybe our DeepSeek would be better, less
They're both
censored
censored in different ways.
in different ways, right? So then the
Yeah.
combo will be less censored. But yeah,
So
I don't see a quantized version on Olama, so I guess I'll just use 70B.
I'll look up which exact one I'm using after this call and I'll let you know.
Mm-hmm.
I
Cool.
want to say it was Gwern. Is that one GWERN or
Oh,
GWEN?
that's an art DeepSeek model. No, Gordon is a blogger.
Okay, not then it's not Gwern, it's somebody else.
Not Quen.
There was some version that I used that I was able to, it's like 80 gigabytes or something. It was able to fit in RAM for me. I'll find it. And I felt
Mm,
like it was the speed was 10 tokens per second. So it was pretty good.
pretty good. Wow, amazing. Yeah, it's fun to run these models on Olama and have it all locally.
Yeah, yeah. I run it on LM Studio. It's functionally the same thing. So yeah.
Mm, mm.
Um, what was I going to get at? Oh, agents. Agents are really interesting. Did you read all of the stuff that's come out recently from OpenAI and Anthropic on how to think about
No.
agents? Okay, so there's like a 36-page document from OpenAI on how to think about agents. I recommend everybody go search for it. So like on their
Mm,
blog or something.
nice.
And I want to make a comment, which is there isn't a standard definition of what an agent is across the industry. So when different AI labs talk about creating agents, they use different definitions, and this makes it very confusing for people. Um, here's how I'm thinking about the problem, and then we can maybe scope it. So when you do a task, um, there's like a single shot task where you are going to write an email to Joe, right? And so that's a single shot. But sometimes you're going to do actually like a full workflow. Like for example, you have a photo that you're going to edit in Adobe Photoshop Lightroom, and there's 7 specific stages that you're going to go through with that photo. That's a workflow. Um, there's plenty of things that we do that are both single shot and workflows. And so the question is, what's the difference? What is an agent? And then what is an agentic workflow? So a lot of people will say, I'm going to give a task to an agent, but the task is actually a workflow. Like I want you to edit this photo in Photoshop through all these different stages. And so that's just fundamentally where the problem lies. And then this
Is a
idea of,
multi-step.
yes,
Yeah.
it's a multi-stepped thing. And the challenge is that right now, the LLMs, you input unstructured data and you get back unstructured data. And when I say you get back unstructured data, even when you specify get back structured data, except in very limited cases like a JSON API or something that's explicit in the prompt, the structured data that you get back is different every time. And so the problem with going through a multi-step workflow with unstructured in and unstructured out is that 2 or 3 steps into the workflow, the whole system blows up. And there's also this, because there's too many combinations, there's also this thing where when you talk about an agentic workflow, you have a standard deterministic workflow that's going to have like first do step 1, then do step 2, and at step 2 if you do this then go left, and if you do that go right, and a choice among options, and it's deterministic. And so there's this idea of we're going to have an agent that's going to run the deterministic workflow. So it's quite an open field, and it's quite complicated in terms of how we're like working against it, programming against it. And again, OpenAI and Anthropic are the ones that put out sort of the white papers on this. And both of them have slightly different definitions about what it means to be an agent versus what it means to have a workflow versus what it means to have an agentic workflow. And so what I was going to say is one of the experiments that me and some other guys ran that we had success on is that we have consistently now we can get unstructured data into structured data and on a consistent basis. So there's no hallucination. And we think we're one of the first people that have done this, and it allows you to do an agentic workflow where basically you have an agent that looks over a deterministic workflow. So a human being starts the workflow. It's maybe like a customer service thing. And so you have a conversation with the agent. It takes in your data. It puts out a structured output that allows it to go through a deterministic workflow and consistently refer back to the structured output that it created in a way that allows you to successfully execute that entire workflow. And so I guess I just wanted to talk about this because I thought it was really cool. And the other thing is that if you're in AI and you're like, I don't really understand prompting or what's going on, I would say the idea of just taking unstructured data and making it structured in a way that you can run a deterministic, basically like software workflow, that is an incredible unlock and like basically still puts us at the beginning of the game. So like we're even though we've had 3 years of chat GPT and like we feel like a lot's happened, the fact that we haven't been able to even there's not a single company or entity that can do a successful workflow, right? So like
Hmm.
the ones that are
What
talked
about
about are
Manus?
so my understanding was that Manus was doing reasoning, which is not like you can't tell it like go book me a hotel with these n-dimensional criteria for my trip next week. What it does is it sort of like single shots a itinerary, but then can't like get all that stuff done. Like what I'm talking about, there's one company that is making a business on you tell it to book your medical appointment for you, and it will call up the medical doctor's office and book an appointment for you.
Okay, so you want to
And
actually,
they,
so that's different from multi-step alone. You're saying actually operate in the world.
yeah. So like to run a workflow, because you need to have structured this relationship between unstructured data from the human being to structured data to operate some deterministic workflow.
Yep.
And what I thought was cool about the medical thing was, again, it's highly scoped down. So you say like, I need a medical appointment with this doctor next week. I have availability Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And so then it's able to take that conversation, turn it into a structured data format, and then call or email or communicate with an API that doctor's office to find the slot and then book the meeting. And they just, I think they raised like 20 or $30 million last week or
So
the week
that
after.
so that reminds me of there's some research now. They plotted the amount of time the kinds of tasks that the AI can do and finish correctly,
Yes, but
and
they're
the
they're
amount of
research
time
tasks.
research,
They're
but I
research
guess
tasks. They're
any
not
kind of knowledge
workflow
work.
tasks. They're not workflow
Okay.
tasks. They're
But
research
like you can
tasks.
imagine the similar thing where you say like, oh, this thing would take a knowledge worker or knowledge person a task like 1 minute or 1 hour or 1 day. And
Yeah,
so I think that's another, they were trying to say there's a Moore's law of every 4 months, the amount of
there
time
is.
doubles of how
Yeah.
long. So that's kind of interesting. Like, oh, you can finally give someone a task that would take 2 months. It's like what it's like pretty much everything. Like, I guess
Yeah.
building
So
an airplane takes 2 years, so maybe that'll be a thing. Like,
yeah. So this is actually really interesting, I think, as well.
but
Like
we'll
I'll
hit a
make two
wall
comments.
eventually. The question is, where's the wall? Like, we can only do tandem
Well, I'll
tasks for
make
a few weeks.
I'll make two comments here. One of them is that so what you're talking about is research, and I think it's currently at 2 hours. So you can basically ask a single prompt and you can get back structured output that is 50% of the time better than a great human being at doing a 2 hour research task. I think that's how you do it. So like I want you to go spend 2 hours researching this topic, and the AI can come back with after a single question with a result that approximates at the 50th percentile that 2 hours, which is incredible. Right. And like functionally, this might turn into multiple days by the end of next year. And so the question that you have is basically like, if you think about something like a PhD research effort, like how much time does it actually take to do the research for the PhD? And another way to think about that is on the other side, which is if something takes more than 90 days to do, the government can't do it at all. So every single thing that the government does has to take less than 90 days in theory, and in practice, it takes 10 years. So like there's like bathrooms that have to be built in San Francisco, or we're going to build track for a train. And any project that basically would take like more than 90 days, like functionally can't be done by the government. And then you could sort of make a correlation with corporates where they don't undertake projects where the time horizon is beyond their ability to like return capital. So for example, in minerals and mining, between when you buy and mine and then when you actually get the material out, depending on where it is in the development stage, that can take anywhere from 10 years to 25 years. But the private equity firms that are investing into those assets only have like 12-year fund lives or 15-year fund lives. So there's a massive discount when the probability of getting stuff out of your mine is above the fund life, like by a huge amount, not like by like a factor of 10. So you because you think there's like a net present value calculation for something at 12 years, and then you'd think you'd run it at 15 years, but there's a huge steep drop off because of the time value in the fund that's doing the investments, and like obviously it's a superposition thing. Um, and what I find super interesting about that is that like it's just like a breakdown of where these things happen. And so then the question is like, for human work, what is there a task that we do that takes longer than some amount of time? So like when Facebook was originally coded, it was Mark and maybe like five guys in a room. And how long did
Mm.
they do that task? Probably 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. And like at the point where AI can capture that workflow and do that for 12 months, like do humans now start working on projects that take longer? Do you just chain those eyes together, AIs together? All kinds of really interesting stuff. But this idea also that like the length of time, so like rich people have money, so they'll be able to buy more tokens and more time on the AI. And so does it end up looking like this private equity thing in all these different classes where anything that takes longer than the fund duration, the average fund duration in the market, basically takes infinitely long because there's no capital for it. So like if you have a mine that you know you can get stuff out in 25 years, if you begin today, you can't raise money for it.
Mm.
It's basically infinite. But if you have a mine that you can get stuff out in 12 years, then it's very easy to get money for it. So I'm curious in AI and in
Yeah.
intelligence if there's these tasks that take longer than whatever the median is. Um,
So
the same thing is true with
the return on capital is also related to the interest rate. When interest rates are high, you need to have things that return money pretty immediately because your alternative risk-free rate is like 5, 10%. If the interest rates are very low, like 1% or even 0%, then your timelines are, 0%, they're infinite. You could wait forever to get money and you're still happy because it's better than 0%.
yeah.
So,
So there's a problem with that calculus, and that it's the market has real learned it from ZERP. So since 2022, here's the state of the art on that thinking. US treasuries are not the risk-free rate of return. The risk-free rate of return in the limit is the rate of appreciation of the market portfolio. So basically, the risk-free rate of return is the amount of return that you're expected to get on the entire S&P 500 basket. Other people have talked about like Apple is the risk-free rate of return. And so the question is like, if the imputed interest rate from owning the S&P 500 is 6%, then that's the risk-free rate of return. And it actually changes the calculus about what you're saying to such a degree that it is an interesting and active discussion, I think, in the field. Which is like, so there's all these things that talk about Google's revenue per quarter and how it's so much bigger today than it was in 2013. And the question is really more like, is it actually bigger, or is it that the dollar has been depreciating because we're looking at the US Treasury historically, but what we should actually be looking at is these hyper efficient representations of the market. And sort of like an analogous thing is the US military has enough people in it that do enough different jobs that it's functionally a replication, like a sample of the entire society. And so like any sort of diffusion of innovation or something like that that you can model in the military is pretty much a one-to-one correlate for how it models into society. And so there's all kinds of really interesting things, experiments that you can run as a result. And so like then the question becomes like, is it the US Treasury that's the risk-free rate, or is it actually some market basket? And the smartest people I know are now saying it's the S&P 500 market basket.
Yeah, I don't know if that makes so much sense as a risk-free given first few things. One is it's highly variable. Like it will go down for 50%, right? At one point during COVID recently. And there are times when it's
30,
gone
30%.
flat. There times where it's gone flat for a decade or two. And so it's not risk, I mean it's just highly risky and variable. Second, other countries could have better, more stable treasuries. For example, Switzerland. I mean, there's limited capacity, but there are other
Right. But
countries
like
that have
China can't buy
Japan,
$1 trillion
maybe.
worth of Swiss bonds. It's
Right.
not a thing.
So in terms of big treasuries, maybe just a variety of European treasuries or Japan or things like that. Third, if the U.S. Treasury T-bills are not valuable, then U.S. Delaware-based corporations also aren't because they're entirely dependent on the U.S. providing its shelter of, rule of law.
I'm just setting the table. We don't necessarily need to talk about this. I'm just trying to explain that there's sort of an interesting comment here about what is actually the risk-free rate of return and how do you measure your wealth relative to the M2 money supply versus your percentage ownership of the market portfolio.
It's Bitcoin,
So
obviously.
if
The
you're not
risk-free
in
rate is Bitcoin.
if you're not increasing your share of the market portfolio, or in this case, your share of Bitcoin, then you're not increasing your wealth.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, historically, for the last 100 years, U.S. stock market has been very, very reliably going up. But given the
Right, but
turmoil that's happening, it might not happen.
is the stock market going up or is the dollar going down? That's what I'm trying to say. The stock market is valued in dollars. And so if you're trying to measure how wealthy you are, it's not I had $1 million 10 years ago and I have $10 million today. It's I had X percent of the S&P 500 market portfolio 10 years ago and I have X plus Y percent today.
The dollar is going down, obviously. It's an inflationary currency, but the stock market is increasing in excess of that. Actually, more than
I
double
don't
in excess
so
of
there's
that.
a bunch of data to show that um
You can compare it to like gold, you can compare it to other
I,
currencies. It's
again,
like
like
very easy to compare.
there's tons of people like, all right, I don't want to get into like this. I opened up a can of worms here. I'm just suggesting that when you value your when you value your personal wealth, like what are you looking against? And then the other problem
Okay.
is we talked
To
about
get
this.
well to get back to AI, we can talk about this brilliant article written by an anonymous person, Visions of the Future. It's called The B2B Trap. It's how people are investing too much into AI B2B SaaS.
Is that was that written by you that you say a
Is it,
brilliant
I
person?
just sent it. I just sent it on the, on the chat. I don't know if you see the chat.
Yeah, I can see it. I don't want to. If I open it, I feel like it'll close the right.
Oh,
Doesn't
okay.
I disappeared?
I don't know. But I'll
Oh
show
yeah,
it on the
that's you.
screen.
That is you. Yeah, I mean, I think we're in agreement that the that venture has over rotated into B2B SaaS, and that's because of ZERP. So my contention is a little different from yours, which is that like this is because of zero interest rate policy, and basically all the capital market allocators needed returns, and so venture was more than happy to provide returns. And the easiest way to fake returns is in B2B SaaS because
Mm.
you only need a few companies to do a fake ARR
An
sale.
IOU.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in order to raise the valuation. And so then it
And
just
then they say
becomes,
promise you they're going to do a year, but then they can cancel the contract. And that's
yeah,
a big
exactly.
company. A big company had that. They signed the IOU, but they could cancel anytime.
Yeah, yeah,
But then they
exactly. It's
projected forward 2 years of revenue
right. So if you think about it, like,
automatically in the bank. We were able to
correct,
borrow against it. Yeah.
correct. And then they represent that to their VCs who are then represent that to their LPs and the LPs
Yeah.
need the return. And so it just becomes kind of like a greater fool game where everybody and B2B is easier to do that in than B2C because the numbers are easier to fake. Like you can't come out with a B2C company like Facebook and be like, we have 2 billion users, so we're valued at this. And people are like, no, you don't have 2 billion users. You have 2 billion bots. Whereas like,
Well, that
if
happens
you're,
in consumer too. I just heard a story where somebody was
I'm not
saying
saying it doesn't, but it's
they
just
had a
way
million.
easier to
Well, the
do
way they do
5
it,
fake things
well, no,
in a B2B
it.
company.
I think it's not necessarily harder or easier because I heard about the story. They bought a million installs, but just installs, right? Like no one ever opened the app. And if you go in the app, you see that no one's using it. And but like if the VCs are, don't know how
They
to
don't,
use
no,
the
no, no, no,
app,
no, no.
like they're not
Assume they
Gen
know.
Z, they don't know
No,
how
no.
to like play
Assume they know.
Roblox, they don't get it. Like,
Yeah, no, no, no. You think about this the wrong way. Assume they know that the app installed number is bullshit, but they just need a reason to mark the value up so they can
are
go,
you saying
no.
that they knew, but they thought they could get the but just for the value up, just to get the management fee on a new round, but they're gonna get
Management
blown
fee on a
up the
new,
next thing.
I understand,
No
but
way.
the idea is that
That's
they're going to
way too
continue.
short term thinking.
No, no, they're going to continually hype these businesses until they can dump them on retail and exit. That's
That's in
the
7 years.
that's the entire point of the game.
That's in 7 years. There's no way.
I understand, but there's entire people online like Lauren Bialik who write about Doximity and all of these SaaS companies that have fake revenues because they just sell to each other and they're great short opportunities.
Proximity is fake, you think? It has
That's what
real
Lauren
doctors.
goes. Lauren has all this data that shows that it's a fake company. It's
Lauren makes a
really wild.
lot of big, bold assertions
I
that are
totally agree.
unsubstantiated, and I don't know if any of
I
them have
totally
panned
agree.
out.
And this is
Like,
not
did she
investment
break
advice.
Theranos? Like,
I I I think did she break Theranos? I think so.
oh, well, that would be pretty notable then.
I think she broke the story. I don't know. So I follow a bunch of these short guys because I find them really interesting, and Lauren is, a really interesting person. And
I
the
also
thing
called
that I'll
Tesla
say,
short.
the
Yeah.
thing that I'll say is that LPs couldn't get, like, if you think about like institutional funds, couldn't get money in the capital markets because zero interest rates were so low. And so then they turn to private equity, and private equity is full of people that want to make money. And a really great way to make money is to create a situation where you have a business to business that keeps getting marked up every single time. And then eventually you sell it to some other private equity firm or
You sell it
somebody
to
else,
HP,
or you sell it to HP for $10 billion and then it's only worth a billion. There's plenty of
and
that.
then you get murdered as the CEO gets murdered. You and your whole
Yeah,
family gets.
well, he didn't get murdered. He just happened to die in a freak weather accident. Anyway, sorry. This is like, don't cheat people, I think is my takeaway. But I do think that I do think there's a lot of this and that with a lot of these companies. Like I think there was something like $1,300 billion plus B2B SaaS unicorns, and like for sure 400 of them are done. And they haven't marked to
Only
market.
400. I think it's way more than that.
No, no, no. I think I said for sure
For
400 are done.
sure.
Like, so basically it's like 400. I think the analysis that I read, and maybe you have better data than I do because you wrote this paper, but basically like 400 maybe could make it. 400 are like on the margin, and 400
Oh,
are
and they're all
definitely going to
B2B
fail.
SaaS. And they're all B2B SaaS still.
Yeah, there's 1,300 B2B SaaS companies that had a greater than $1 billion valuation in their
Mm,
last round. And
mm.
this was pre-Ukraine war 2022
I should have put
explosion.
that in my essay. Like, hey, that we're overinvested because of these fake B2B SaaS over
I
valuations.
think that they're fake. Honestly, I do. Because like I also, when I was in Silicon Valley, like in sales, we would go to all these companies and it would be like the brand new traceability company was raising money at $1 billion valuation. And you're like, tracing is interesting, but not worth this much money.
Well, Wiz sold to Google for 20 billion and it just started last year.
I don't know anything about that. I was just saying, like, I
Okay.
came across a bunch of traceability companies that were
Mm.
B2B and they were worth more than $1 billion. And it just seemed weird. It seemed weird.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I'm just saying
That no one's ever heard of.
there's this like market. Well, it's like I don't know if you saw the clip from the All In podcast where Chamath, who is, by the way, did a lot of these SPACs. So he's responsible for dumping a lot of these sort of like end of life cycle companies on the retail.
Mm.
So don't think that I'm supporting what he's saying just because he said something funny, which was he was talking about Doge canceling contracts in the U.S. government, and they found a $1.9 billion IT contract from a company called Centennial, And I think he made a very astute point, which is that he's quote unquote an investor in Silicon Valley, and this is a quote unquote technology company, and no one has ever heard of them ever. And yet they have a $1.9 billion contract with HHS or somebody like that. And I think that's pretty interesting, right? Because I also remember I did B2B SaaS sales, and the largest sale that anyone has ever heard of that I knew about was around $20 million a year, maybe $30 million a year. So this idea that there was a sale that was worth $1.9 billion and it was quote unquote legitimate is very hard to believe, extremely difficult to believe because when you talk to other salespeople, they talk about like, did you hear about this guy who sold a SaaS deal that was $30 million? Because the commission's usually like 8 to 12%, right? And so salespeople talk about that stuff. And like nobody had ever talked about a sale above $50 million in the entire industry. And so then when you hear about these companies that have these sales that are even bigger to the government or wherever, you're kind of like, this doesn't feel like it's a real thing. And for me, when I'm looking at all these hedge funds who have LPs and all these institutional investors who are representing like pension funds or whatever, the government, and they need returns. Like their models show they need 8% every year. And so they go to venture and be like, we need 8%. And they're like, sure, we'll like create an entire market and then hopefully like dump, you'll sell your shares on an insider round 2 rounds from now. And so your IRR will be at like 11% instead of 8. So you'll hit your hurdle rate, but you won't necessarily hold it to the public exit. And so then that's an entire thing around we want to keep these companies private longer because we want to try and dump them to like some third world sovereign wealth fund, right? So you have Tiger Global or somebody that's representative of like the Saudi wealth fund, and now all these guys who are trying to get money for their LPs and like the Chicago teachers unions are like, how do we sell this multi-billion-dollar turd to the Saudi wealth fund in a private round? Right. So it's like I find it really interesting. Not quite AI, but
That is high finance. That's the really highest levels when you're really playing the game. You're really long-term thinking, how do you mark this up and up until you can sell, like you said, to the Saudis or to SoftBank for 10 billion.
yeah. And like, was it really ever real? Like, I know you worked for Lyft and I obviously used Uber, but like, were those real companies that drove value for shareholders? Now the prices are like, in my opinion, higher than where the taxis were.
Yes, to actually be profitable, it has to end up being higher, or at least to be profitable and returns to the investors
Yeah.
until it gets recapped.
So it's like, what was that? It was like a really weird, was that like a really fancy money laundering scheme?
Well, it's definitely more useful still. It's a higher value service. For example, the taxi cabs in New York still they all the drivers claim that their payment system's broken and you have to give them cash. And 100% of the time they always tell me that still. And now it's better. It's good that I can do tap to pay, right? And
Yeah.
it's not really money laundering when everything comes through secure tap to pay, right? That if anything, the cash businesses were actually about money laundering.
No, no, I,
Um,
I, I don't mean money laundering like actual laundering of cash. What I meant was this was money laundering at an institutional level. So on the investment side, it was money laundering, not
so
the
so
individual consumers.
if you look also at like Brooklyn has actually flourished in the last 5, 10 years, and that's partly because Uber and Lyft are able to actually operate there, where you can easily call a
Mm,
cab and actually go there, as opposed to before, all the cabs were on Manhattan and that's it. Like, could you get a cab in Brooklyn? Probably not. Maybe in some corner, not if you're black, right? And now,
yeah.
like a lot of people now are able to get cabs that would be like ignored by racist cab drivers. Women feel a lot safer because
Yeah, because you
their
can you
location is
can
tracked. You have other
well, and
safety
you can also
features,
request like a woman driver, right?
and you can request a recording. So there's a lot of things that increase safety significantly, right? And still
Okay.
accidents happen, which is very sad, but it's much less than with cabs actually. So it means 10, 100 times more people are taking cars for hire than they were 10 years ago.
Okay, so it
So
was that even if the
it
prices are higher, that it transformed the industry to being more.
transformed the industry, but also transformed cities. I think if you don't remember this, but people in cities 15 years ago just didn't get around very much. Like it was much harder to get around. And when they did, it was pretty. painful. Now anybody's like, oh, I need to go to this thing. I'm an emergency, and they just call a Lyft, and then boom, they're there.
Hmm.
And it's like $5, $10. And in the past, like you could get a cab. I don't know. Try to get someone to give you a ride if you're lucky. Like
Yeah.
don't definitely do anything last minute because otherwise you have to do 2 hours on the trains. And so it's just part of the urban renewal we're seeing, where more and more people are enjoying cities, is because of Lyft and Uber making it actually uh, actually able to enjoy the cities. And we don't even remember what cities were like before that.
I don't, like I said earlier, I don't remember anything before the Dark City 2020 change.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Before Me
okay, yeah.
Too.
So
There was nothing before Me Too.
I'm very excited. Yeah, it's man, what a weird what, have you seen like how they're trying to exonerate Harvey Weinstein now? It's so weird. That
Oh, that's weird.
our
Oh
culture
my
is
gosh.
so weird. It's so bizarre. Everything is so bizarre and fractal. Like I don't really know what's real. But anyway, agents, awesome. I think we're still early innings and we're gonna
So
see
you're not
some.
running any agent right now to do stuff for you?
I am running agents in a lab to potentially go to market, and so we're gonna
For a
launch tomorrow.
business? For a
Yeah.
business? Oh, congrats. Oh, look,
Yeah.
this is the announcement. Get ready.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll
No, no, but
go.
we're not, it's not gonna
What's
be
the
public.
URL?
I'm not no,
No?
we have alpha customers who are like,
Okay.
this could be interesting, and
Wait, is this
it
B2B
is
SaaS?
yeah, exactly.
Great.
No, it's just the
Okay.
first,
I see
it's
what you're
the
doing.
that's the first. Yeah, exactly. This is my huge institutional money
Exactly.
laundering scheme. I'm
Yeah.
about to kick off my own thing. No, I just mean that me and a couple guys were like playing around with stuff and we solved this little problem. And so we're trying to see if there's market
Oh,
validation for
okay.
solving that problem.
Nice. Yeah, I mean,
Um,
you could be. I heard about an app yesterday where all it does, someone vibe coded something. All it does is reorganize your desktop icons every day so that it's more like grouped and like organized. And it's
yeah,
making $100,000 a month after
that's
2
incredible.
months. After two
That's
months,
like
he launched it.
that's incredible. Yeah, no, our thing is just um it's a very challenging but stupid problem, and the there's been many attempts to do a deterministic software front end on it, but the inputs are too unstructured, and so by using a large language model to capture the unstructured data and then forcing it to make outputs into a structured system, then you can do the deterministic thing. And it's basically it's a enterprise, it's an ERP thing. So it's
Hmm.
basically like when businesses do a certain kind of task in a very particular niche that I have familiarity with due to other work. They it's just like a painful thing. And so we're trying to um, see if agents can be used here because like right now the workflow for
Mm.
humans is crazy.
But you're not
um
using AI for it being an assistant. Like I have an assistant that I pay to do some things, but it'd be great if I had an assistant that I could just say, "Hey, go do this." I mean, more than just the deep research reports, but like, go
so
do this book
yeah,
this
it's
travel.
not,
Like,
it doesn't work,
doesn't work.
unfortunately. It
But
doesn't
it's been
work.
years. It's been 2 years. Like, why hasn't? I mean, Apple feel like could do this easily.
I think no, I don't think it's I don't so again, the problem with hallucination, so like I said, I've been working on this problem for 6 months in a lab, like trying to figure it out with some friends. The problem with hallucination on the output makes it so that you can't use the output of one process as the input for another in a
Yeah,
chained
it gets
way.
worse each
And
step.
so
It's too many steps.
it blows up after like two or three steps. And so you have to force the system to always have a structured output that's the same, and it can't hallucinate outside of that. And it just hasn't been possible to do that until very recently. Like we literally just got, I think it's Claude, could be OpenAI, to do a deterministically structured data output from an unstructured input. But even like OpenAI, if you read all their papers and follow all the people, they haven't figured out how to do this yet. And I'm not super convinced that we have either. It's just that we haven't run enough queries through the system where the anomalies are going to show up. Like maybe we've solved the problem 90%, and previously people have only solved it 50%. So it's really obvious to see like it's failing because it's only working 50% of the time. And now we're doing it 90% of the time. And we're like, well, every time that we test it, and we've tested it hundreds of times, it's worked. But as soon as we get customer feedback, potentially, and then they're like, right, well, and then they
This
say, like,
doesn't
this
work.
doesn't work. Here's how it
Yeah,
blows up. And then we're going to be
yeah,
like, okay, cool. So we thought this was going to
yeah,
work, and it still doesn't work. But I
yeah.
think if it does work,
Do
then
you
we'll
think this
solve
is the
this.
wall? Do you think we're hitting after this? This is the wall. We're gonna hit AI winter for another decade. Like
I don't
we're just
know.
not gonna be. We can't do multi-step, or we're gonna
I, I
pass
don't, I
flow
don't
past
know.
this.
I don't know because I don't know. I don't know. The Chinese, so I think this gets back to AI progress. Is it staying the same? Is the
My
velocity that,
theory is that it's gonna stop. We're gonna hit a winter because we stopped publishing papers. All the big labs that are doing the research stop being open. They stop publishing. I talked to so many people that are doing stuff and they're not releasing it. And that's what causes
yeah,
winters. All the money causes people not to publish. Yeah. What is it like? Good times
yeah,
create secretive men. Secretive men create like difficult times. Difficult
bad
times
times.
make
Yeah, great open men. Yeah,
make researcher men.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
All right, I have to
I don't know
go
what
to
the
the
answer
next
is.
meeting.
Yeah, me too. But here's my last thing. I think AI innovation is still accelerating.
Okay. It's
That's my throwaway
definitely
comment.
evidence that OpenAI is not accelerating, but we'll see what happens next year.
Okay. Yep.
Maybe we
Talk
have
soon.
ASI. Okay.
Maybe.
See ya.
All right. See you later.